Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Radical Candor podcast. I'm Kim Scott.
I'm Jason Rosoff.
I'm Amy Sandler, and today we're answering a question that Kim got about how to implement radical candor on a team where there's two managers and only one of them is practicing radical candor with their direct reports. So I'm going to read this question. Kim, I suspect you may want to jump in, but we'll see how it goes.
I'll try to stay silent, but
well,
as we know, it's hard.
As we know. So this person writes, quote, I'm a co-manager for a program, and while I highly recommend the book, they're referring to Radical Candor, to my co-manager, and we have developed a really close and radically candid relationship. We approach issues with very different perspectives and lenses with our direct reports. I'm very in tune with emotions, take a compassionate and understanding approach to issues, relying on my communication skills to support folks as individuals and not just people who work for me. I really enjoy supporting and mentoring people, and I have strong communication skills. At the same time, my counterpart is very analytical and has very big visions and plans for the work, while sometimes struggling to relate with people or see things with compassion instead of annoyance when things aren't getting done or when people don't understand something. So I'm wondering how I can effectively work to implement the skills and practices laid out in Radical Candor with our team when only half of the team is directly reporting to me. So I only have one-on-ones with that half. And the other half is directly reporting to my counterpart. They close saying, I don't want to inadvertently create a more confusing or resentful environment that makes it seem like I'm playing favorites when I only have those relationship building meetings with half our staff. It's an interesting yet challenging structure to navigate, especially as I reflect on your book.
Yeah, this is a hard problem, but not an impossible problem. I mean, I think I've never been I've never been in this exact situation. I don't know, Jason, have you?
I haven't split a single team into two with two separate managers. I'm trying to think of the closest thing that I can think of is when you have not a functional team, but like a project or a work team where you have two people who might be responsible for different aspects of the work that team is doing. But that's not quite the same thing as like they're also their career managers.
Yeah. And it sounds like, I mean, I want to make sure I'm not reading too much into this, but it sounds like kind of the subtext is that this other manager doesn't have one-on-ones with their direct reports, but the person writing in does have one-on-ones. I mean, how did you all interpret the question? Is that part of what's going on here?
I interpreted the question, to me, it seemed almost like there were two questions. One was the question around how do you effectively co-manage with someone? And then the other one is how do you practice radical candor both with your peer who may have a very different approach to these ideas. And then also, how do you practice radical candor with these folks who are reporting to this peer? I think there was a concern about that their direct reports, meaning the letter writer's direct reports, were having more of these radically candid conversations, and they maybe weren't getting that from the other person.
But I mean, it's not really playing favorites for you to have one-on-ones with your direct reports, but not someone else's direct reports. So I think that part of this is they need to be very clear about who's reporting to whom and what that means. Right or wrong?
I think that's right. I think this person has really internalized radical candor and believes that it's the sort of right way to do things, and the advice that you give in the book is the right things to do. And I tend to have that worldview also. And I think there's also potentially an assumption here that the people who are not being managed with this by the person writing the note, being managed by the co-manager, are definitionally worse off because they're not you know what I'm saying? Because they're not receiving the radical candor treatment. And that may or may not be true. Like, I think that it's important to recognize that I'm sure some parts of it are true. Like people, other people who are reporting to the co-manager may want more recognition for their contribution or to be treated more like a whole person. That like those things might be true, but there's no data in the note that says, oh, I've talked to people and they're sort of upset.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it also, my hunch is that part of the issue here is that there are probably some people on the team who would rather work for the person who wrote in. There may also be people on the team who would rather work for the other person. And so I think one of the things that these two co-managers need to work out is, are they going to decide who reports to whom, or how much say are they going to give to the employees and who works for whom?
Right. Fundamentally, I don't think every manager needs to approach it does not need to be, nor should it be, a cookie cutter approach. Not every manager has to manage in the exact same way. I think to me, the fundamental agreement is like, hey, we're going to treat everybody with respect, right? We're going to like respect them as individuals, as people. We agree to be open to people's input and feedback. Like, you can set some sort of a floor, essentially, but then you don't have to say, oh, one-on-ones have to have exactly this agenda with every direct report, because that would also be doing the wrong thing. You're like overcorrecting in the other direction.
Yeah. And I mean, there's some leaders I know whose leadership I really respect enormously, who don't have regular one-on-ones. I mean, I advocate for one-on-ones, but some people take a different approach, and they make it very easy to get on their calendar when they need to, and then they proactively go and talk to people when there are issues, but they don't have one-on-ones. That's not what I would do, but I'm not going to say that other person's management is wrong per se.
Yep.
Jason, what's coming up is a recent conversation that we had about a situation that came up with a client where there were two peers, and they were talking about sort of, let's say, Kim and Jason, right? And so Kim and Jason are peers. And then there was Sally, who works for Jason, but Kim had some feedback for Sally. And so the question was, we were encouraging Kim to go directly to Sally, but Kim and Jason needing to have a conversation so that Jason was aware that Kim was having that conversation with Jason's direct report, for example. And I'm just wondering, are there some learnings there that might be applicable? This is even more of that because they're co-managers, but even just thinking about, how do we as a team, as a full team, communicate?
Yes, and I believe that there's some learnings there, and I believe that most of this problem is solved by a radically candid conversation between these two co-managers.
Yes.
Yep. So should we give it a try?
Sure.
You want to role play having that conversation?
But I don't know what we're talking about. That's sort of, we've been rambling around. So let's pretend like, let's like give it something slightly more specific. Like, I think, Jason, you're not having enough one-on-ones with people on your team.
Can I clarify something? I think that they're both having one-on-ones. I think the co-manager is not practicing radical candor in their one-on-ones. So manager one is like, I'm only having one-on-ones with my people. Co-manager's not practicing radical candor with their direct reports. Though I
think we're not clear on how they're not. Yeah, I think we're not clear on how they're not practicing radical candor.
Well, we could just make it up.
Do you want to make something up?
For the sake of the role play.
Brandy, did you have something you wanted to?
No, I just wanted to clarify that I didn't think the issue was the not having one-on-ones. It's just that the second co-manager is not practicing radical candor with their direct report.
And I would add to that to say that I don't think the email quite says that the author of the note that was sent to us has data to back that up. The email is written in a way where it's like, I suspect that this is how other people feel. And I think that, Kim, is the issue. It's not so much about have the one-on-one or not have the one-on-one, or generally speaking, practicing radical candor. I think the conversation is about for example, reacting with annoyance when things aren't getting done, or when people don't understand something, as an example of not practicing radical candor with their team.
It seems like, in other words, the person who wrote in is sort of higher up on care personally, and the other person is further over on challenge directly. And so that can be confusing for a team.
Yep. I think so. So that's what I think needs to be challenged here is, hey, we have very different approaches. When something goes wrong, this is the way that I respond, the author of the note. And when you respond, then this is the way that I've observed you responding. I think that's the conversation that needs to be had.
All right. So let's have kind of a conversation where we're seeking out opportunities to figure out what's going on. And we're just going to, as we have this sort of role play, we can start making stuff up that's beyond
what's in the note.
That's beyond what's in the note.
Who wants to be our compassionate communicator, letter writer?
I think Jason should be that person. I always like being,
sure.
I always like playing the asshole. Not that this other person is an asshole writing about. I'm impatient.
Yeah.
Impatience is something that I am always working on.
Here we go. Hey, Kim, thanks for taking a minute to chat with me. How's your day going?
Things are good. Things are really good. I mean, we're never moving fast enough. There's a lot going on, but I'm I'm excited about the opportunity ahead.
Yeah, I hear you. I feel like we've our eyes are always bigger than our stomachs. We're always trying to get a lot done. And that's part of what I wanted to chat with you about, because I feel like we've been working so well together over the last few months. And I have some observations about some of the interactions that we've had collectively with the team. I was wondering if it'd be okay if I shared those with you.
Sure, but I got to say, our eyes are not bigger than our stomach. We're just not moving fast. I mean, I think you and I, I just want to put that on the table because I don't think we're moving fast enough. And I kind of think maybe you're coddling people a little bit too much.
That I think I'd be open to hearing why you're feeling that way. In fact, I'm kind of curious. Is there something that I've done recently that makes you that gave you that impression or made you have that reaction?
Yeah, I mean, the other day, James was late on a project. And, I know his kid was sick or whatever, but I mean, he was late on the project and you just gave him a pass. And it was not okay that he was late on the project.
Do you think that a different kind of reaction in that moment would have gotten a better result? Is there something I should or could have done differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I was trying to say, but you kind of cut me off like I was being a jackass, is that if he was going to be late, he should have come to us sooner to tell us he was going to be late, so we could have put someone else to help fill his gap. But instead, we were just late, and we couldn't recover. Bad news early. That's what I say.
Yeah. And I think I actually agree with you on that point. I think we should get bad news. We should get bad news early. And I also think there are some things that we just can't plan for. Like in this particular case, the issue was that the illness was unexpected. He was sort of out of communication while he was taking care of his kid. So it wasn't. I'm not saying he doesn't bear responsibility, but I am saying that I think that there's a moment for compassion because, James is telling us like his kid is dealing with a serious illness and we're focusing only on the lateness of the project in that public meeting. That's what I was trying to counteract. I was trying to balance our approach so that we were showing some understanding, but I think we do owe it to James to challenge him to let us know that stuff earlier.
Yeah, because James, it was like James got the diagnosis and like quit working for 3 days before he let us know what was going on. Like that's 3 days that were lost and gone forever. He could have called us right away. It's not like I would have said, "Oh, your kid's sick, tough shit, keep working." I would have said, "Okay, let's get Sarah and put her on this project to cover for you." Like I got his back, but he's got to tell me that I need, that there's a problem, and he didn't.
Yeah. I think that is like an entirely justified reaction. And I would add that in the moments when we were having that conversation and other people were observing, it was very clear that you were annoyed with James. It wasn't exactly clear why. And so the concern that I have is that could come across as you're annoyed because James' kid is sick. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't want to give that impression, but like you kind of shut me down. You were like, "Oh, we got to be nice to James," and then I was like, "Well, what, like bad news early," and now I look like an asshole.
Yep, I could I can see how I could potentially do a better job in the moment of acknowledging, of being clear. Like I'm being clear with you now that there's two things that we're trying to accomplish in this conversation.
Yeah, two things can be true at the same time. Absolutely, totally believe that.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do? Like James works for you, and so I kind of think it's your job to tell James this. I don't know, but I feel like part of the problem that we have is I always have to be the heavy. Like I don't have great confidence that you're going to make this clear enough to James.
That's something I think you and I need to work on, because I do feel like I'm giving this kind of feedback on a regular basis. And so there's probably something that we can do differently to make sure that you feel confident about that.
Maybe you're giving that feedback, but James didn't do what he should have known. Like if James were working for me, he would have known to call me as soon as he got the diagnosis. I
mean, maybe what James would have done is he would have like worked through his kid being sick to try to meet an expectation that is not entirely reasonable. Like that.
See, this is the problem. I am not unreasonable. I feel like you're always putting me in the box of being the unreasonable jerk, and I don't think that's fair.
I honestly think you're not helping yourself. Like you see it as me putting you in this box, but what I observe is how people respond to you. And what I'm trying to tell you is that you do not come across as reasonable. That's not a say you're an unreasonable person. Those two things are very different. I'm saying that you do not come across as reasonable in those moments when you are pushing people to hit a deadline.
Well, should I just let them miss the deadlines? I mean, I sort of feel like it's not reasonable to just let it go. Like, because it's like not only for James, but I want the whole team to know what to do if they have a problem. I want this to be very clear to the team. Bad news early. And I feel like people feel like there's no consequence for missing their deadlines.
Yeah. And what I would say is I think people do feel like there's a sense of consequence for missing their deadlines. It's just that things happen where people are still missing their deadlines. So since we can't absolutely prevent it, I think the thing we need to agree on is we need to make it clear, bad news early. That I'm 100% on the same page. We need to make that clear. I will give James the feedback that he should have given us this information sooner. And I think you need to talk to James and say what you said to me, which is to acknowledge that this thing was out of control. You care that his kid was sick. And you and I have agreed that this is after I talked to him, you and I have agreed that the right thing to do is for him to notify the both of us if something is going to get in the way, even if that thing is out of his control.
Okay, I'll do that. I would also ask you to deliver to the team a bad news early. Like we need a norm of bad news early. And I don't think we have one. And we have missed 70% of our deadlines in the last quarter. And that's not acceptable.
Yeah, I think that's something we should deliver together. I think it's going to be important for the two of us to stand up there together and say that we have talked about it and we have agreed that this is the team norm. What do you think?
Okay, totally agree, but let's practice it because I feel like sometimes when we present stuff together, we're in this like mom and dad, good cop, bad cop kind of, and I don't like being the heavy.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, sounds good. All right.
All right.
Amy, let us know. What do you think? Brandy, Nick, feel free to chime in.
Well, I kept waiting to see if I would jump in, and I was like, no, I think they're going to get to I felt like you're going to get to a good place.
Yeah.
And there was a really important moment, Jason, when Kim kind of pushed back again about the bad news early, and you really reaffirmed, yes, we have to declare that. And you actually kind of summarized next steps. And at least for me, there were a lot of effective things you did. One was that you really heard what she said and you really acknowledged the importance of bad news early. And you were actually very clear on what you were expecting from her. Like go back and, talk to James about what you actually just shared with me. And so I was curious, just as you were coming up with that in this spot, like what was it that you were trying to do with that follow-up?
I think I was willing to, in this role, I was willing to accept that there was more that I could be doing to prevent this kind of thing from happening in the future, and that Kim was suggesting was that we haven't encouraged the team to do this like pretty simple behavior, which is to deliver bad news early enough, or we have been inconsistent, and or like the messages that I've been delivering have somehow countermanded the principle of bad news early. And what I wanted to do was I was trying to address the like, you are not an unreasonable person, but you can be perceived as unreasonable. Mm-hmm. And so what I want you to do is I want you to talk to James and let him know, because I think that that's going to go a long way to helping to improve, to match the reality of the care that Kim shows for the people on the team with the perception that Kim can be sort of unreasonably impatient with delays.
I think once you asked me to do that, I think I was really going to do it. Like I heard, because part of what I was grousing about is that I didn't want to always be put in the role of the bad cop. And you were asking me to go in and be the good cop.
Yeah.
So I didn't say that explicitly, but that was kind of what was going on in my head.
That is so interesting. Yeah, I definitely kind of tonally and emotionally felt that kind of shift. There was something also where Kim started off by saying, you're sort of coddling them, et cetera. And for me, Jason, you did not kind of rise to that. So I'm curious, Jason, when Kim was at the top talking about how you're coddling the team and not being as direct and holding them accountable, did you keep that in your mind as something that you wanted to be sure to get back to, of like what you were going to be asking from her? Or how did you kind of both manage that emotionally, but use that as a follow-up to not make the feedback personal?
Yeah, so I think the way I responded to that was to solicit feedback, to say, that's interesting. Like, tell me what I have done that has made you feel that I'm coddling the team. And from my perspective, Kim did a great job. Like, behaving in a radically candid way, she shifted from sort of the personality or sort of like high level abstract thing to like specifically, we've missed all of these deadlines. And so I didn't actually feel like I needed to come back to the coddling thing, because in the heat of the moment, people don't choose their words perfectly. And, maybe Kim's frustrated. And if she had continued to like sort of vaguely insult my management, I probably would have said we need to come back to that. But instead, she got right down to brass tacks and was like, this is the problem. This is what I've seen happen, and I don't want this to happen again.
And I think that's a good segue to like the advice we would give to the person who wrote in, which is like, let's go back to the Radical Candor order of operations, unless you had anything, Amy, that you wanted to.
Well, the one thing I'll say, and I think this is a really good tie-in, is that I just wanted to name that in this conversation, there was a lot of what, Kim, you like to call feedback debt.
Yeah.
There was a lot of stuff that had not either been heard or addressed around whether it was the coddling assumption or whether feeling that, bad news early had not been addressed. So I think, if you want to talk about how the order of operations especially can get at some of that feedback debt that was really under the surface in that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I think it always makes sense to solicit feedback. When Jason solicited feedback, I gave it. But I started out maybe not saying it in the best way, but that's the good news about when you solicit feedback, you're expecting it to come at you, and it's a little bit easier to forgive some sloppy delivery if you've just asked for the feedback. I think to try to get curious, not furious, if somebody says something that is maybe not in the best possible way. The other thing that I would say about soliciting feedback in this situation, as we were doing the role play, I was sort of having a flashback to a situation where I had co-founded a company. I said I had never been in this situation. As we're doing the role play, actually, I realized
familiar.
I had. Yeah. And in this situation where I was co-founder, one of my co-founders was extremely, extremely impatient and harsh. And I was always worried about my management style, that I was, too nice. And so I let him be the bad cop so that I could be the good cop. And that was not fair to the team. And it also wasn't fair to him. So I think that soliciting feedback in this kind of situation where one of you has one style and another has another, you want to make sure that the two of you are in lockstep, that the team is not, going to one parent because they think they'll get a yes from one parent and avoiding the other parent because they think they'll get a no.
I thought that was a really great ad at the end when you were like, let's practice what we're going to say. Yeah. Because it also felt like there was some feedback there too of like, we've had some of these things come up before and we haven't been aligned.
Yeah. Because I got the impression, and this may not be fair, but in reading the note, I got the impression that the person who wrote in didn't fully approve of the co-manager's management style. And that may be like, that needs to get out on the table explicitly. Maybe I'm reading too much into this.
That was how
reading myself into the story.
Well, I felt like there was some frustration there. And so I think and soliciting feedback on both sides could be really helpful. Yeah. Kim, when you were talking about soliciting feedback, what was coming up for me also was, the instruction was to, follow up with James and actually show that care. So I'm curious, Jason, when you think about soliciting feedback, for example, from Kim to James, so how would you want Kim to have that conversation with, say, your direct report? And what might be the difference in soliciting feedback when you're doing it kind of peer-to-peer, co-manager to co-manager versus soliciting feedback Kim to James?
I don't know that I have a super strong opinion on exactly how I'd want Kim to have the conversation. I think in part because I actually trust that Kim does care about the people that we work with, but maybe is like my point of view going into in that moment was Kim does care, but doesn't always show it as effectively as she could. And so I would say like, I would trust Kim to be able to like, she just did such a good job of explaining it to me that I would trust that she would be able to do a good job explaining it to James. And I wouldn't necessarily require that Kim solicits feedback from James either. Like, I think the most important is an acknowledgement of like, hey, I wanted you to know that I care about your kid and that I understand that's what caused the delay. And my frustration was not about your kid being sick, but it was about us missing the deadline without communication.
Yeah. And I think that when we're suggesting to this listener who wrote us the note, when we say solicit feedback, basically that means from that other manager, like solicit, because it's possible that the person who wrote in is doing something that's really frustrating that other manager. And so before the listener talks about what the other manager is doing that is frustrating the listener, they should solicit from their co-manager. And then the next step, of course, is to give praise. And I think if the person who wrote in can take a beat to think about what they appreciate about their co-manager, what do they really like about the way that this co-manager works? There's probably some utility to this person's impatience. It helps the team achieve better results. So that's what I mean by, that's why after soliciting feedback, give praise is the next step in the order of operations. And then, of course,
hey, Kim, before you jump onto that, one of the things that comes up sometimes as questions, we have this order. I think sometimes people take it actually quite literal, right? That it's sort of happening all at the same time, or is it happening sequentially? So I'm curious, just even in this specific situation, when you say give specific and sincere praise. So one could be even, hey, I love your desire to have us all, bad news first or bad news quickly. Is that an example of specific and sincere praise? I mean, is that kind of I just want to get really granular for people.
Could be that simple. And it's a good idea to have in mind when you go in to solicit feedback. It's a good idea to have it. It's just a good idea to have in mind at all times and in all cases the things you appreciate about the people who you work with. A little gratitude goes a long way. So that's give praise. Next step is to give radically candid criticism. Again, Amy, to your question, doesn't have to all be in the same conversation. But at some point pretty soon, the person who wrote in needs to let this other person know that they think they're being a little bit too aggressive and not high enough up on the care personally dimension of radical candor. But you want to make sure that when you do that, when you give that radically candid criticism, that they're being humble about it. That they may be wrong. That there's not one way to manage everybody. In fact, it's one of the things I really struggled with in writing the book is that I didn't want to come across as this arrogant know-it-all. Here's how everyone should be like me. That's not what I was trying to say in the book. And then, of course, so solicit feedback, give praise, give radically candid criticism, gauge how it's landing. Like, I think in the role play Jason and I did, we were both open to each other's. Mm-hmm. And it's good that this person has a good relationship with their co-manager.
And I would say that, Jason, in the role play, he said, it was clear that you were annoyed and it wasn't clear why, and that can come across as you're annoyed that James's child is sick. And I thought that was a really great example of providing radically candid criticism in a way that was actually helpful. Like it was almost like Jason was gauging it for you for the group in some way. Yeah.
On your behalf.
Yeah. And Jason was saying it, and Jason was gauging how I was responding. Jason was willing to pause and talk about some other stuff and acknowledge that bad news early is important before he went in to complain or to give me some radically candid criticism. Shouldn't say complaint.
Yeah, it did not feel like a complaint at all.
No,
I mean, I think again, Jason, with the word coddling, and you're not sort of going down that potential rabbit hole, I feel like the conversation went in a very different direction.
Yeah. Look, I was basing that on the relationship that was described in the email, but also on an observation that I have from many years of trying and failing to give feedback effectively, which is that there are moments where you, as the person who wants to give feedback, should expect that it is normal for people to respond defensively, and one common defensive tactic is to sort of try to turn the tables on you and make it about you. And I think that when the relationship is good, we should be very open to those moments and say, well, let's talk about me for a second, and let's figure out like what I could be doing differently. If the relationship was bad or this person had acted in bad faith, I probably would have said, sorry, like I don't think that was like the way that you phrased it. I don't think it was fair. Like, is there, tell me what you mean. To some extent, like, I think you have to have enough sort of self-management to be able to allow some of these things to sort of like roll off your back. You know what I mean? I think if the more you sort of focus on the unhelpful parts, the more unhelpful the conversation is likely to become. If you can instead try to refocus the person on something helpful, then I think you're more likely to at the end of that to build to be in a conversation that builds that relationship as opposed to sort of gets in the way of it.
Great note. And I think just to add the importance of being helpful, and I really felt that in the conversation that you were having with Kim, that you really were sharing to be helpful. So in the spirit of being helpful, let's get into our radical candor checklist so we can start putting radical candor into practice.
Tip number 1, if you are co-managing a team or project with a peer, don't force each other into roles where one of you is all care personally and the other is all challenge directly. Practice a radical candor order of operations with your co-manager regularly to acknowledge and hear one another's perspective and to avoid creating feedback debt.
Tip number 2, if you want to practice radical candor with people who don't report to you, you can do it in 2-minute impromptu development conversations. For example, in between meetings, at the start of a meeting, you can check in with someone and say, hey, I want to see how I did presenting this executive summary. Do you have a few minutes at the end of the meeting? It doesn't have to be a big deal. And I think the biggest point here is that someone does not have to report directly to you in order to engage in radically candid conversations.
Tip number 3, even if you and your co-manager don't agree on everything, which is 100% what's going to happen, try to find common ground on what you do agree on, the norms that you want for your team to operate within, and share it with each other first. Come to alignment on those things. Discuss any areas of disagreement so you both understand why you disagree, but commit to a shared course of action so that when you go out to the team, you don't commit the cardinal sin of confusing people by one leader pulling in one direction and the other one pulling in the other direction.
And I thought you all did a great job on that. I wanted to thank again the listener for writing in and their commitment to practicing radical candor and to being a compassionate and clear communicator. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. We love getting people's scenarios. So if you have one, send it to us.
That's right. And you can go ahead and send it to us, podcast@radicalcandor.com. You can also send criticism for us at podcast@radicalcandor.com. Of course, if you like what you hear, please go ahead, rate, review us wherever you listen to podcasts. And finally, for more tips, go ahead, radicalcandor.com/resources. You'll find show notes at radicalcandor.com/podcast. Bye for now.
Take care.
Take care, everyone.
The Radical Candor podcast is based on the book Radical Candor, Be a Kick-Ass Boss Without Losing Your Humanity by Kim Scott. Episodes are written and produced by Brandy Neal with script editing by me, Amy Sandler. The show features Radical Candor co-founders Kim Scott and Jason Rosoff and is hosted by me, still Amy Sandler. Nick Carissimi is our audio engineer. The Radical Candor podcast theme music was composed by Cliff Goldmacher. Follow us on LinkedIn, Radical Candor the Company, and visit us at radicalcandor.com.